In this section, I'm going to be talking to you about the stereo output channel. That's this red fader all the way over on the right-hand side of the mix console. And understanding the stereo output channel is critical whenever you're mixing or mastering, because whatever happens at the stereo output channel is what your listener is going to be hearing when they listen to the final mixdown of your Cubase project. So whatever happens at the stereo output channel is going to be heard by the listener. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the signal flow of not only the mix console, but also the stereo output channel itself. So as we've been working through this course, we have taken all of these tracks of our Cubase project, and we have either sent them directly to the stereo output channel, or we have routed them into these group channel tracks and then sent the output of these group channels into the stereo output. And in fact, right now, the only channels of our mix console that aren't going into these groups are the effects. So I added a reverb processor and added some reverb to the vocals and the snare drum. And then I also added some guitar delay, and I didn't do that in any of the previous tutorials that you've watched. I just kind of did that in the background because I wanted to have a little bit of delay on that guitar solo. So all of these channels are being fed into the stereo output fader. And if you adjust the level of the stereo output fader, you're going to be changing the volume of what your end user is going to hear on their MP3 or AAC file or WAV file that's going to be burned onto an audio CD. So setting this fader is going to be very important, and we'll get into that in another tutorial. For now, let's spend a little more time on the signal flow of the stereo output channel. So I'm going to reveal the channel settings for the stereo out because it has the same sort of channel settings as all of the other channels in the mix console. So I'm going to hit the edit button to bring up the channel settings of the stereo output channel. And you can see that it has many of the same components as the other mix console channels. So over here we have the inserts and we have the channel strip settings here. And here we also have the equalizer. We don't have any send destinations because we're not going to send anything from this stereo output channel. It is the final destination of all of the audio in the Cubase project. And then everything goes to the master fader. But you need to understand how the signal flows through the stereo output channel because it has a direct impact on not only how your mix sounds, but how turning certain controls are going to affect other controls. So let's start with how the signal comes into the stereo output channel. First, it comes through the pre section. So here is the pre section right here, and it only has a few controls like a low and high cutoff filter, but it has a pre-gain knob. This knob is actually where the sound comes into this channel, and we'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later. But then it comes into the inserts. So it's going to travel through inserts number 1 through insert slot number 6, and then come into the channel strip. Now, as I mentioned in a previous tutorial, these last 2 insert slots come after the stereo output channel itself. So these are post-fader. The first 6 insert slots are pre-fader. Then the signal gets sent through the rest of the stereo output channel, and then after it leaves the fader of the stereo output channel, it comes into inserts 7 and 8. So we'll get into these more in just a moment. But after the signal comes out of the last slot, or the last populated slot, it then goes into the channel strip. So I'm going to click on the channel strip button here, but bear in mind that with the channel strip, you do have this EQ position. This is the equalizer of the stereo output channel, and this is exactly the same in all of the other mix channels. And what this strip tab allows you to do is modify the signal flow through the channel strip plugins and the EQ position itself. So in other words, do you want the EQ before the compressor? Well, you could drag the EQ above the compressor if you wanted to. Typically, I like to have the EQ after the compressor, so I'm going to click and drag that down. So now the signal is going to flow from the gate to the compressor, then into the equalizer, then into the transient envelope, the saturation effect, and the limiting effect. So this is the signal flow after the signal comes out of the last populated insert slot. So if you were to add any plugins to the channel strip, the signal would essentially flow here from left to right. And then bear in mind that the equalizer is going to be dependent upon the position of where it is in the signal flow of this strip tab. Then after it comes out of the very last effect in the channel strip, which is the limiter, then it's going to be sent to the fader. And then finally the signal from the master fader is going to be sent to insert slots number 7 and 8. So as I said before, anything that happens here in the stereo output channel is going to be heard by your listener. So with that in mind, let's do a couple of quick little mastering treatments. We're not going to get into all of mastering right now, but we can add a couple of nice little features here in the channel settings window of the stereo output channel. So I'm going to go to the equalizer, and I'm going to bring a little bit of the 250 hertz out of the entire mix. Let's take a listen and see what that does. See, that just helps the bass and the bass drum sit a little bit more evenly in the mix. And then if you notice that your mix was a little too bright or a little too dark, you could adjust any of the other equalizer bands here in the EQ of the stereo output channel. So if you wanted your mix brighter or darker, you could adjust those settings here in the equalizer. And then finally, there's a really great plugin that comes with Cubase, which is Magneto 2. So I'm going to go into the channel strip, and Magneto 2 is an analog magnetic tape emulation, and it's a really good one. And I can apply Magneto either by adding it as an insert effect, which has a much cooler control panel. If I go to Magneto here and open it, then I could apply this effect to the first insert slot, but the most important controls are found in the channel strip version anyway, so I'm going to unload Magneto 2 from that insert slot and instead add it in the saturation slot here. So I'm going to click this little caret at the end, choose Magneto 2, and then I'm going to just continue the playback of the project, but I'm going to start turning up the saturation control, and it's going to add the essence of analog magnetic tape, and I think you're going to really like the result. Let's listen to it before and after right now. See how Magneto 2 really thickened up that mix? I'm going to go ahead and leave that in our stereo output channel. And in the next tutorial, I'm going to talk to you about the clip indicator.